Hi, third graders. Okay, this is chapter 30, Wakey Wakey Whiffington of the Creakers. Says, Lucy sat bolt upright. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding. Somehow, while staring at the shadowy nothing, she drifted off to sleep. It was still dark. Stars twinkled overhead as she looked around Camp Whiffington and saw that everyone had done the same. Everyone was peacefully snoozing away. Old Man Carvey was wrapped up in his fluffy robe. Paige Turner had fallen asleep with her nose in a book. Mayor Noying was snoring into his megaphone. All was peaceful. I don't know if that sounds peaceful. Lucy sighed as she glanced down at her sleeping parents. Although her plan hadn't worked, she had succeeded in one thing, bringing her parents back. Not just back from the Wallop, but back together. She looked at their happy sleeping faces, and even though their eyes were tightly shut, she knew there was love in them. But that wasn't all Lucy saw. She leaned in close for a better look at her mom's and dad's eyes. Her heart leapt. In the corners were the unmistakable little crumbly drops of dozy dust. She quickly glanced around at everyone else. They all had dozy dust in their eyes, too. Slowly, she raised her hand up to her own face and wiped the corner of her eyes. As she lowered it, her heart began beating so hard that she was sure it would wake everyone up. There, on the tips of her fingers, were little nuggets of golden dozy dust. She looked toward the whopping great bed, and a huge smile crept across her face. While they were all asleep, the enormous pile of Whiffington garbage had mysteriously disappeared in the night, just like magic, just as Lucy had planned. "It worked," Lucy whispered to herself, grinning from ear to ear. Her smile was suddenly greeted by the warmth of the rising sun. It peeked over the tops of the 4 trees, acting as giant bedposts, and began chasing away the shadows. Lucy glanced around at the townspeople as they lay snoozing, blissfully unaware that her plan had worked. That Lucy, the kid, had found a way for them all to live together in harmony. That despite their differences, it was possible for human and Creaker to coexist. As the sunlight melted the night, replacing shadows with the warm orange glow of morning, Lucy looked at the last remaining spot of darkness beneath the giant bed, where 4 pairs of twinkling black eyes quickly disappeared into the world below. The end. Well, that was short, so apparently I should have just finished that in our Zoom meeting. But there is a little more, but that is the end of the story. It says, okay, so that's it. Story over. I hope you enjoyed it. What do you mean what happened next? I've already written the end. I don't think I'm allowed to write anything else after that. It's the rule. Oh, all right. Maybe just a little bit. And remember, that's the author being silly. So there is an epilogue. It's called Tomorrow. An epilogue tells you what happened after the story finished. It says, Grunt, Guff, Scratch, and Sniff creaked back into the Wallop, dragging with them bags and bags of glorious Whiffington trash. "Looks at all this mucky mess we got," cheered Guff. "More than we've ever snatched before," yelled Scratch. "And we didn't have to hardly any creaking," added Grunt, sounding quite amazed. "All this gustin' garbage just sitting there for us to snatch just like's that," croaked Guff with rotten delight. "All thanks to the Kitterling," said Sniff happily. Grunt stopped suddenly, causing the other Creakers to bump into him. He turned and stared at Sniff, looking deep into his round black eyes. No Creaker had ever said a nice word about a Kitterling before. They were so used to hiding from Kitterlings in the shadows beneath their beds, sneaking into their rooms, and creaking around their houses. Being nice about a Kitterling was something new, something strange. "His brain must be rotted," laughed Scratch nervously, worried that Grunt was angry at Sniff. "He just needs a good slop at the tavern." "No," Grunt whispered. "Sniff be right. If it weren't for the Kitterling, this place would be all sunburned and we'd all be dusted. She saved us." He gazed with astonishment at Sniff. "And Sniff saved the girl. That means Sniff saved us." Sniff kicked the ground with embarrassment, not knowing where to look. Guff and Scratch were stumped. Things were changing in the Wallop, changing for the better. "And looks," went on Grunt, "we got enough rotten mess in one night to last us a whole week." He pointed at the huge bag of smelly prizes they were hauling behind them. "We's not be needin' to creak up there every night like we used to," agreed Sniff. "We's be able to—" "Spend more time with our creakerlings," Grunt interrupted Sniff, which took Sniff by surprise, as it was usually him that did all the butting in. "Perhaps kitterlings be not so bads after all," Sniff suggested. They dragged the heavy load of Whiffington garbage deep down into the depths of the wallop, clawing out rotten gifts to creakers they passed on the way. They gave Mrs. Blister boxes and boxes of broken eggshells to rebuild the creaker school that had crumbled to pieces in the wallop quake. "No, thank you," she cried as she accepted them excitedly. Sergeant Gurgle and Major Curd, 2 Wallop police officers, siphoned all the curdled milk to use as fuel for the Wallop police cars. Claggy Maggot and Maggie Clog, owners of Maggot and Clog's grocery store, collected all the banana peels, moldy vegetables, and fish bones to sell in a week or so, once they'd matured a bit. Eventually, Grunt, Guff, Scratch, and Sniff had delivered all the rotten delights to the hard-working creakers of the Wallop below Whiffington as they built their weird home. There were boos and hisses as the 4 creakers passed through. It was a real hero's welcome. Grunt had been deep in thought, his mind turning something over as they creaked through the town. Suddenly he leapt up to the top of a heap of rot and motioned for the crowd that had gathered to quiet down. "Fellow creakers," he bellowed, and the hundreds of slimy creatures hushed and listened. "We be startin' a new time. We be rebuildin' ourselves a new wallop." The crowd booed in agreement. Grunt continued, "And this new wallop needs a new king." Silence fell. Grunt stood atop the pile, looking as powerful as a creaker could look. "Grunt for king! Grunt for king!" the crowd began chanting. Grunt held up his hand and silence fell again, like magic. "I would be honored to be your king," he croaked, and the crowd booed in celebration. "But," added Grunt. The booing was instantly replaced by confused whispers. "But I thinks this new wallop needs a king with new ideas, a king with a new way of thinking," Grunt boomed, staring into the eyes of his fellow creakers. "Someone who's not afraid to be different, to stands up for what he believes to be right." He turned and suddenly pointed his claw at a creaker behind him. "Someone like Sniff." Gasps erupted from the crowd as all eyes turned to the small boil-covered creaker standing in Grunt's shadow. Sniff dared to trust the kitterling when no one else did. He dared to be different. It was Sniff what saved you, said Grunt as he dropped to his knee and bowed his bald head to Sniff. There was a pause as hundreds of creakers stared at this teensy creaker. Then one by one they dropped to their knees and bowed in respect to their new leader. He was the one who had helped to save the wallop. Sniff stared out at this disgusting kingdom and let out a little excited squeak. Grunt announced, "All hail his rottenness, King Sniff!" The creakers had a new king. "Well, that be it," said Grunt, handing out the final scraps from the bottom of the last trash bag to Guff, Scratch, and King Sniff. "Takes whatever's left home for your families." "See you tomorrow," Guff said, his bottom releasing a little parp. "No, not tomorrow. I think we's be all right taking a little time off from creaking," Grunt smiled. "That's if the king approves." "Oh, yeah," Sniff stuttered, trying to get used to the whole King of the Creakers thing. With that, Grunt gave the 3 of them a little salute and left them standing in the twisted wallop tunnel. He creaked all the way along the winding spider leg and didn't stop until he was standing outside a dark crack in the wall of the wallop, the entrance to his home. The foul stench of stewing sprouts filled the air, and he took a deep sniff of his wife's awful cooking. "Home, sour home," he sighed as he stepped inside and was greeted by the most wonderful sound in all the wallop. "Daddy!" The end. Again. Oh, look, he's got a baby. All right. There's some creaker speak in here. Dozy dust is the creaker's powder that sends you to sleep. Kitterling is a child. Quickie bit means quickly. Twizzle is a silly person. Twazzle is a really silly person. Washy brain means confused. Wallop is the world beneath your bed where the creakers live. Sprog is another word for a child. stinkerful means smelly. Okay. And I don't have an AR sticker on the back of this, but you will have to look it up. It's The Creakers by Tom Fletcher. So if it's not on AR right now, it might be because it's too new, and it will be later, and I can remind you later. But this is a really long book, so it's probably worth at least 5 AR points, maybe 7 or 10. So I'll look it up, and when I send this link to you, I will include, if it's AR, I'll include the points and the quiz number. Okay, bye guys, miss you. We'll vote on the next chapter book when we have our next Zoom meeting after spring break. Happy spring break, happy Easter.